Masters of the Internet, and welcome to another episode of
80-Bit Pod Smash,
where gaming goes to grab a beer. We are your hosts.
Penguin and Termite. I am Penguin.
I am Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games.
That's right, and tonight we are going to be talking about video game criticism. What's the point? What's the purpose? Why is it important? All that stuff we'll answer, and it's kind of closely tied together with video game journalism, but it is something entirely separate in and of itself. So we will dive into it, but first, we are where gaming goes to grab a beer. So what, Termite, are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking Bell's Two-Hearted Ale, an American IPA. Yes. Bell's doesn't make anything bad. Their beers are incredible.
I love Bell's, and I used to have a bottle opener that was made out of, like, I don't know what it was made out of, but it was made out of, like, solid metal, and it was very resonant, like a bell. Mm-hmm. So it was almost like it was made out of what, like, a bell is made out of. But I've since lost it, and I'm super sad about it.
Aw.
Yeah.
The bottle here with the Two-Hearted Ale says, brewed with 100% Centennial hops, this Bell's American IPA is named after the majestic Two-Hearted River in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, bursting with hop aromas ranging from pine to grapefruit and perfectly balanced with malt backbone. This beer is well suited for adventurers everywhere. And it tastes exactly as that description says it does.
Exactly.
Interestingly enough, that you lost your bottle opener that is like a bell is because Virginia lost Bells, period.
Wow.
In their distribution. There was a problem. And they, like, whatever Bell's uses to distribute could not distribute to Virginia, and we stopped getting everything Bell's around here. And I remember it was for a couple of years. Yep. But we got them back. So Bell's made their triumphant return at the end of 2020, gracing us with their presence in all the grocery stores and Total Wines around us. So
Very
I have
cool.
it, and it's good.
I'm jealous. Well, not that it's an IPA, but I'm jealous that you have a Bell's. So I'm drinking my final Goodwood of the year, or final Goodwood that I have for my 4-pack. To finish off, bring in the new year, I guess. I mean, we're like 2 episodes into the new year, so whatever. But I am enjoying that for the last time for a while, probably. Although, who knows? Maybe I'll get another 4-pack of it. But I will probably get something different because that way I have something different to talk about on the podcast. But for those of you who don't know or haven't listened to us recently, Goodwood is a bourbon barrel stout, and it is one of my favorites. So, not the strongest bourbon barrel stout in the world, booze-wise, but it's definitely got that bourbon barrel stout flavor that you like. And as Termite did some research, this company not only has a bourbon aged stout, they have a stout aged bourbon as well, which I want to try at some point.
Ooh.
Although I was talking to that with my friend Nate, and he said, I can't imagine that would probably, like, it's not going to be bad. It's going to probably taste like bourbon, but I can't imagine you're going to get anything stout out of it. And I was like, probably not, but we'll see what they do.
Yeah.
They probably do something to it to make it taste like a stout. Because I can't, you know what I mean? Like, the alcohol's the stronger flavor, so
right.
than the stout aspect of it. So it's like, would it really pick up that much of the stout flavor just being aged in the barrels? I don't know, but I want to try it to find out.
Me too.
But cool. All right. So instead of talking about various things and sort of bantering or having like a single thing to talk about before we start our show, I was thinking that it's been a while since we've done this, and I think it's time to catch people up on what do you plan?
What do you plan? What?
So
I wanted to talk about this too.
Well,
you stole
great,
it out of my
we
head.
have so many. We're on the same brain length again, and I thought that both of us have been talking about a lot of games we were kind of playing simultaneously. And so I don't think we've talked about many of them on the podcast. So let's roll.
I have been, well, I'm not going to back you all the way up since the last time we talked about this.
No.
Because
just what are you playing now? What are you playing
right now? I'm actually splitting my gaming attention across 3 different games. And it's because I finished 2 on my backlog. Well, you added 1 to it. So I finished Crash Bandicoot 4 and I finished Final Fantasy 9. Those were not platinumable games. They're both ridiculous. And I finished them, so I have fresh, clean slate, ready to go. And I'm still playing Cyberpunk 2077, but that is an adult game. I can only play it when the kids are in bed. I also received other games.
Very adult.
very. But I received 2 other games for Christmas, and one of them was Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, and another was Planet Coaster. I received more than that, but those are also like ready and slated, ready to go. But I'm currently actually playing Dragon Ball Z Kakarot and Planet Coaster, and they're such guilty pleasures in comfort food and gaming. It is so... I just didn't even know. I didn't even realize what I was missing. Dragon Ball Z is amazing, and I haven't been in that world and in that the anime story in probably over a decade.
Probably
And
makes you
she's
want to
like,
watch Super, right? Dragon Ball Super?
Right, and I'd never even seen Super yet. So, of
neither
course,
have I.
after I finish this game, it ends at the Boo Saga.
Oh,
It's
perfect.
The perfect prime for Super. It takes you through the game with none of those silly filler episodes that just like run on forever. It's the beats of the game that you can actually skip dialogue if you don't want to, and you can skip cutscenes if you really don't want to. So you can kind of enjoy all of Dragon Ball Z at your own pace wrapped around a video game. It's really fun to play. The combat system is fun. It has RPG mechanics. You can develop things. I am loving Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. It came out in January of 2020, so it's a year old now, and it's been on my list forever, but T-Bone got it for me for Christmas, and I am eating it up. And it's a cartoon. It does have fighting and stuff in it, so it's kind of okay to play around with the kids. I don't have to be super strict about it. Certain scenes and certain words, I have to be like, skip that. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You got to go somewhere else. And then Planet Coaster, like I'm trash for coaster games. I played the crap out of Roller Coaster Tycoon over the years. I love creating roller coasters and theme parks. I remember the first time I went to the local King's Dominion, I was way too old to be for the first time, but I was in 10th grade. And the moment I walked in, I was like, this is like Roller Coaster Tycoon. And so I heard Planet Coaster it's made by Frontier. They did the Jurassic Park editor creator where you could make your own Jurassic Park, which seemed kind of interesting, but it didn't do very well. But Planet Coaster has been a PC game. It's been out since like 2016, and they ported it to the consoles, including the next gen versions. And the next gen versions make it comparable to the PC. There's no like paring it down for it to run on lesser hardware. So I got, with gift card money, I picked up this copy on PS5. It's the actual native PS5 version. And I'm having a blast running through the career mode, the cheesy dialogue. This is ridiculous, like create coasters and do all the fun things. Like, yeah, it's a lot of fun. So those are the games I'm playing right now. Those are my 3.
Awesome.
What about you?
I've got 3 too. I platinumed Cyberpunk, so that's done. That's done and on the shelf and uninstalled for now until the PS5 version comes out and there's new content to play. And then I am currently working on the backlog of Souls games, specifically the ones from Software. And in this case, I'm working on 2019's Game of the Year, Sekiro. I streamed it recently, and it was awesome. So go check that out. It should be on YouTube if you want to see me die a lot. But it's really, really fun. I'm really loving it. Very, very hard. Arguably harder than Bloodborne in a lot of ways. So, and part of that's because Bloodborne had a lot of ways you could cheese bosses. And I feel like From Software really cracked down on that in Sekiro, and they wanted you to fight bosses the correct way. So I'm really enjoying that. It's a lot of fun. And I'm also playing the game you got me for Christmas, for our Christmas episode. I'm playing Kingdoms of Amalur. I'm kind of playing that when I'm in the back office and I'm, things are slow at work. I'll like knock out a quest or two. And I'm just kind of slowly chipping away at that because that's going to be, that being such a big open world game does require a lot of time to get through all the various things they want you to do for the platinum. Plus, it was a game that came out in like 2011 or something like that. So it's still got kind of some of that old trophy design that's just awful and grindy.
Yep.
So I've got a lot to do on that. So I'm kind of just chipping that away when I've got free time. And then last but not least, I picked up on the holiday sale for that PlayStation had. I picked up a digital copy of the Remnant from the Ashes Complete Edition. And I've been playing that with my friend Justin. So shout out Justin, because he's been wanting to get into that with me for a while. Some people described it as like 2019's best co-op game. And a lot of people were reinforcing that idea throughout the year of 2020 because the DLC came out for it and people were just saying it was an incredibly good co-op experience. And I can echo those remarks. In fact, spoiler, it's probably my favorite thing. I'll have another thing to talk about for favorite things, but I will say here, just my wax eloquent on Remnant is it is just so much fun to play. The fact that it's Souls-like, but it's not quite as intense as a Souls game.
Okay.
Especially like when you die, you don't lose like anything at all. So you can kind of have that sort of like die over again and don't feel like you're like losing anything. So it's very forgiving in that regard.
Yeah.
And then otherwise, like the fact that it is challenging like a Souls game means that the co-op experience is very rewarding because it's not just like you're both sitting there just blasting through everything and barely thinking about it and just hanging out. Like you actually have to strategize. The game very much feels like raiding, where you like, you'll wipe and you'll be like, okay, well, next time let's try this. And you'll strategize differently. So it's very, very fun. I wish I had a third person to play it with because I think it would be very fun to do 3-player co-op. My only gripe with the co-op mechanics in the game is you can't talk to the same NPC at the same time. So if you all go back to base together, you're like fighting over the NPCs to talk to.
Because sounds like lots of trolling moments.
Right, yeah, for sure. But other than that, like the co-op mechanics are great. I guess my only other gripe with it is that only the host can progress their game, their game campaign. So like if you're joined someone else's, like you still get all the trophies and you still get to keep all of the items and experience and everything you get from your play session, but you won't get your story advanced or whatever. So that kind of sucks. But other than that, it's fantastic. It's a really, really, really I want to play it right now. I want to call Justin. If Justin wasn't working right now, I'd be like, let's play some Remnant because it's so freaking good. So I am a big fan of Remnant from the Ashes. If you are a fan of co-op games and you want something that's challenging and requires a little bit of strategy, you should check it out. It is technically a Souls-like. It has a lot of those Souls games mechanics. So if that really turns you off, then pass it by. But I would give it a shot because again, it's not nearly as unforgiving as Souls games. And here's the real thing: it has a difficulty slider. They don't have like an easy mode. Their normal mode is still pretty challenging, but like you can up the challenge even more if you want to with the difficulty slider. So yeah, so good. Remnant from the Ashes. I'm super excited to work through it slowly because I'm only ever going to really play it with Justin probably. So it probably will be a while before I even platinum it, but I'm really, really having a good time with it. So
the developer of that game is Gunfire Games.
Yep.
And they just came out with another game at the beginning of December 2020 called Chronos Before the Ashes.
Yep. It is a prequel and it was designed for VR actually. And then they like redesigned it, ported it for consoles. So, and is melee focused. So it's not, whereas Remnant is a third person shooter as well as a Souls game. There's much, much less melee. There's no like parrying and stuff like that like you get in some of the other Souls games.
Yeah.
Chronos is supposed to be a melee-oriented action RPG, like a Souls game in that regard. So, yeah, it's reviewed less good than Remnant. I think part of that's probably due to the VR design.
Yeah,
it's VR sense. Nature and being ported to not VR, and I don't even know what that means. I don't even know if it's third person. So either way, I'm probably going to give it a shot at some point, but not right away. But yeah, Gunfire's done a lot of good stuff recently. And Sweet. They're probably one of THQ Nordic's better developers. I think they did Darksiders 3, actually. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, THQ Nordic, they acquired like 80 studios over the last couple of years. So their name is on
tons
everything.
Of IP. Yep.
Yep. Twist
and they're not...
to your what do you learn?
Yep.
The twist here is what is on the back burner right now. What are you playing immediately upon finishing what you just talked about?
So I've got, in that same sale, I got a copy of Nier Automata, which I mentioned in a news episode recently that I would like to play through again. And this time, since I got it on PlayStation, my original copy, I bought it on Steam because that was before I was really invested in the PlayStation PlayStation environment. So now that I'm in the PS environment, I want to play it and get trophies for it. But there's
what
also...
have I done to you?
You have ruined me. And so I want to get that. And then I've also got on my back burner Luigi's Mansion. I want to play through that. Luigi's Mansion 3. You got me. I want to play through that.
Yeah.
And on the Switch, which is not a PlayStation thing. And shoot, there's something else that I'm blanking on right now. And yeah, we'll say that for now.
Awesome. I am also working on a Nintendo Switch game. Luigi's Mansion 3 is still, I'm working my way through it. I haven't finished it yet. And I'm working on Age of Calamity, Hyrule Warriors. That's really, really fun.
Yeah, nice.
And those are actually more of like, what am I actually playing? So what's next for me is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, which is the other Christmas gift I got from T-Bone. I can't wait to relive my 90s teenage angst through a skateboarding video game. And also, I picked up a copy of Persona 5, the Steelbook edition, for what
Persona
ended
5
up costing me Royal. Thank you.
Yep.
Persona 5 Royal, which ended up costing me like $10. And so I have that ready to go as well. As soon as I knock out Cyberpunk, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, I feel like I have freed up enough bandwidth to start chomping away at the Persona 5 bug that I've been dying to play forever. And I realized the Persona 5 Royal is in 4K because it was optimized for PS4 Pro. And the original Persona 5 was not. So not just the trophies got better, but the graphics are enhanced too.
That's
so
awesome.
with 4K TV,
I'll have to fire that up on my 5 then. Check
dude, that game's got to look good, right?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's very stylized and very kind of anime looking, so it's not going to be probably as noticeable, but I think it'll still look really sharp.
I find those games are more pleasing in like when I get an upgraded TV and an upgraded console, the first kind of games I want to go see are games like Persona 5. The ones with a lot of color and a lot of like stylized pop. I'm not so much worried about what God of War looks like, although I am. But when it came, I haven't even seen God of War in 4K yet, so I don't know. other than at Jimothy's place years ago. That was awesome. But anyway, Persona 5 is like the quintessential, let me test this TV and make sure I got my settings correct.
Nice.
Kind of game.
Sweet. Oh, gosh. Now you're going to make me want to play through that game again.
Do it. Do a second playthrough.
Do you need me to link you the guide I followed for the Platinum?
Yeah, eventually.
All right. Fair enough.
It's my next game, so you get plenty of time.
Okay, cool. You'll never see it coming, man.
I can't wait.
All right. We spent a little bit longer time on that than we normally would, so let's do a quick lightning round of...
Doing this podcast is our favorite thing.
Doing this podcast is our favorite thing. Crap. Sorry.
Will that line up?
No, probably not. Maybe it will miraculously, but that was my bad. I was the one who messed that up.
Lightning only strikes once.
It's true. Lightning. Speaking of lightning round, super fast. What is your favorite thing? Like, blast through it.
I acquired an Xbox Series X through Best Buy.
Amazing.
Yes. I'm all about the all access, $35 a month. I did it as soon as Xbox stock came in through Wario64. I went on the website, got it done. It's over. It's here. There's an unboxing video on YouTube. You can watch it. And I am loving the Xbox games. The system is ridiculously fast. Quick resume is a feature that is awesome. I can turn on the Xbox and immediately fire up like 3 different games, whichever I feel like playing, and switch them at a whim. I'm playing Halo and my son walks in. I'm like, I don't want you to see a bunch of first-person shooting guns, so I'm going to switch to Forza, and boom, done. No switching discs. It's all digital. Game Pass is awesome.
Nice.
All the Xbox titles that are coming out.
We're going to do like a masked stream of some Halo, right? Like that's going to happen?
Sounds awesome. Let's do it.
All right. My lightning round favorite thing. It's fitting that I had just mentioned that I lost that Bell's keychain because my wife got me a suitable replacement, I'll say, in my stocking over Christmas. Ooh. And I just remembered that I had it and am going to go right after this and attach it to my keys. She got me just a little, like an NES controller, like one of the classic NES controllers.
Oh,
and
nice.
It's just a little tiny, I mean, it was a little $5 thing or whatever from Five Below, but I'm stoked on it. I love it. I'm so excited because I love NES is like foundational. It was my very first gaming console I ever owned. And I'm a big fan of that aesthetic, even though it was an ugly console and a very, very crappy controller when you actually when you actually hold one now. It's very clunky.
It's a box.
But it is very fun. Very fun. I'm very fond of that controller, so I'm very excited to kind of represent it on my keychain. I'm a keychain. If like there's an alternate universe out there where I like collect keychains and have just this massive set of keys because I'm a dork for that kind of thing. But anyways, that's it. That's my favorite thing. So
hey, you could set up a cork board with little like nails and like hang them all up.
Cool. Yeah.
I
don't actually have a collection of them, but I could see myself collecting them.
Do it
in an alternate universe. Okay, fine. I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna get keychains from you constantly. All right. So that's favorite things. That which moves us on to our next final segment before our main topic, which is DLC. DLC stands for downloadable content, and it is a fun conversation that you wouldn't normally have about video games, and it is meant to just be some little game that we play or something. Sometimes it has something to do with our main topic, sometimes it doesn't. Tonight does not have anything to do with video game criticism. Instead, I wanted to talk about we are at the beginning of January. New Year's has just passed for us. Christmas is over. And we are probably firmly entrenched, even as late as this episode comes out, we are probably firmly entrenched in what I like to describe the post-holiday blues, which is where all of your time off is probably up, back to work. Everyone's back to work. Everyone's kind of sad and miserable and lethargic. And I wanted to talk about that. So we're going to talk about that, but the conversation, again, being sort of a game, being sort of a conversation wouldn't have, and trying to tie it back to video games. I could talk about what games you're playing, but I thought that would be boring. Instead, I wanted to talk, which video game character do you think would have the hardest time with the post-holiday blues?
I'm going to go with the Animal Crossing villager.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because the holidays are a major build-up through Thanksgiving and immediately into Christmas, over the blanket of winter. And so the winter holiday, quote unquote, that's still going on now, post-Christmas, it has like snowflakes and snowflake recipes, and you can roll snowmen, and your whole island is all snowy. That started after Thanksgiving. So you had the build up to Thanksgiving, and then the celebration therein with all the special DIYs, decorate your house, rugs, carpets, all the food stuffs, like everything. And then you jump into winter where you're like, yeah! And then the whole island gets decked out in Christmas lights, and there's like sleigh bells added to the music every day, all this stuff leading up to Christmas. And then there's Toy Day, which is what they call it in the game, where you give gifts to all of your villagers and they give gifts to you, and there's exclusive items, and you decorate the whole island with all these cool Christmas decorations and presents and trees and lights galore. And then New Year's hits, and there's a major celebration for New Year's, a big countdown clock added to the center square, and then everything's gone. You log into your island and nothing's decorated. It's winter still, so it's kind of quiet, calm, and there's nothing. It's just January. So he's got, or
Boring.
she has
Sad.
got the post-holiday blues, because everything for the last 3 months with Halloween, Halloween, Thanksgiving, winter, and then Christmas has just been amazing. And now it's just blop, nothing. Until Easter, which was a terrible holiday inside of Animal Crossing New Horizons, by the way. It was atrocious and annoying.
Sad.
So yeah. Yep. So he's got
to quote
sad
our president,
and post-holiday blues.
To quote our current president, sad.
Wrong.
Sad. Anyways.
Hey, by the time this airs, we might have a new president. Right?
What's the date? Close?
Might
close.
only. I'm saying might only because of the date at which this episode airs.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
It is 100% sure we are going to get a new president.
Yeah. No. I think it's very close. January 18th. So yes,
2 days.
I think
in 2 days we will inaugurate the inauguration of our new president.
But
Joe
our
Biden
current president. Sad.
Yep. That describes that.
So my answer is I'm going to make a very interesting pull here. And I'm going to say, this is a character from that I'm pulling from back in my WoW days. And I'm going to say Bronzebeard from World of Warcraft. He actually was a solidly World of Warcraft character, but he's featured in I believe he's featured in Hearthstone and some of the other Warcraft properties as well. I don't think he's as early as Warcraft 3, though his brother Muradin was the dwarf that was with Arthas during the human campaign in Warcraft 3, if you remember. But Bronzebeard is an explorer.
Barely.
He's like an Indiana Jones figure, but he's very, very dwarvish. And in World of Warcraft, there's 3 holidays back to back within over the course of 2 months, and they celebrate Brewfest in early October, which is a very dwarven holiday that's all about drinking, and it's a play on Oktoberfest. Mm-hmm. There is Halloween, which isn't so much a dwarven holiday, but it is, I remember as early as the vanilla Warcraft, it was, Ironforge was a huge hub for where people would be doing all the holiday stuff and casting costumes on each other and wearing masks. And then there's the Christmas event, which has in Ironforge, in the dwarven capital, there is a Great Father Winter who is totally a dwarf. Mm-hmm. And I like to think it's Bronzebeard dressed up as Santa for his people. So nice. It's 3 holidays right in a row that Bronzebeard is probably actively involved in. And now they're over. It's the end. It's January, and there's no holidays. Ironforge is devoid of all decorations and everything. But it's also not the time of year where he'd be going on an adventure. He's not. It's not the middle of summer. There's no new expansions coming out in January, so he's not diving into some ancient ruins anywhere or anything like that. So he's just sitting around Ironforge, and it's now. He's a dwarf, so he's drinking, but it's sad drinking. It's depressed drinking. It's the kind of drinking where you're like, man, get it together, have a cup of coffee, go get yourself a foot massage or something, man. Do some self-care, because you are just miserable right now. So that is my answer for the video game character that's suffering the post-holiday blues, Bronzebeard.
There you go. All right,
that's DLC. Good answers all around.
Meow.
All right. So, our main topic, this is the meat of our episode. We are going to be talking about video game criticism, the idea of critical analysis on video games and what role it plays in the industry, for better or for worse. So, let's talk about let's talk in general about what is criticism, because I think that criticism gets a bad rap. It's misunderstood because the word itself is kind of got some negative connotations attached to it, but what is criticism from a sort of definitive standpoint, as it applies to art? Yeah, go ahead.
The dictionary says the expression of disapproval of someone or something based on perceived faults or mistakes. And the second definition...
one definition, which is probably where the negative connotation is attached
that's why
to.
I said it. The second definition is the analysis and judgment of the merits and faults of a literary or artistic work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's the one we're kind of going for, right?
100%, yes. When you use criticism in the context of a artistic medium, that is the definition that we are talking about. So it is just short for critical analysis. And again, this word critical, we use critical analysis, critical thinking. It's meant to convey just breaking something down and talking about it from sort of a analytic standpoint and evaluating it for better or for worse. It's not just a negative thing. But because of that other definition of when you would say, if you're talking about in a relationship or in a conversation, if you were to be critical of someone, it would usually imply that you were expressing disapproval. So that is why I think in a lot of ways, I think that's the primary reason the word gets a lot of bad rap.
Yeah, it's like the cultural kind of like, for lack of a better word, appropriation of critic has been negative. But when I think of critic, the first things that come to mind are two things, and that is food and movies. A restaurant critic, or a food critic, or a movie critic. And we have the Michelin star system, and then we have the Oscars for like both of those, and like where they are.
I mean, and there's everything in between. There's like Rotten Tomatoes, which is an aggregate of critics. And you've got a Metacritic is the video game version of that, pretty much. And I think again, and to further emphasize, like, part of the bad reputation comes from, like, often critics, there's this sort of mental image of the critic being like, you're just someone who's like profiting off of the work of other people. And a critic does not create anything. A critic just evaluates and writes about what other people create. And so a lot of people, I think, look down on critics because it's like, you're just basically profiteering off of the hard work of other people and poo-pooing it in order to sell newspapers or whatever, magazines or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And I think that's an unfair assessment of critics. And I do think that good criticism, has a very important role in any artistic ecosystem. So we're going to talk about that. But I think it's first important, while we're still on this topic of criticism, I think it's first important because I'm going to use a couple terms here. And I think it's first important to describe the difference between constructive and destructive criticism. So I don't necessarily have that in our notes, but what is the difference between constructive and destructive criticism?
I don't know. You seem to know more about this than I do.
Yeah, the destructive criticism is what it sounds like. It's basically, and it is that kind of like worst possible description of criticism where it's someone just trashing and not only saying all the bad things, but offering no solutions, offering no good no proper feedback. It's just an opportunity to like crap on a piece of art. Right, complaining. Yeah. It's someone getting on Facebook and being like, which I can basically be accused of myself. I recently did this. I saw Wonder Woman 1984, which was awful, by the way. And I would go into, if this was a Wonder Woman podcast, if this was even a superhero movie podcast, I would actually try to give you good feedback and a good critical analysis of why I disliked Wonder Woman 1984. But I did effectively the equivalent of destructive criticism when I got on Facebook and I was like, Wonder Woman is trash, don't watch it, nobody watch it. That is not actual good criticism right there. Good criticism is constructive criticism, and that is where, again, you're basically, sometimes it may be harsh. Constructive criticism isn't necessarily nice. What it is, though, is it says, it's essentially the goal of constructive criticism is, this is how you should improve this. This is how this could be improved. It's meant to give feedback to the creator in order to say, like, hey, with your next shot, maybe look at doing this instead, or maybe look at improving these things. It's meant to
be constructive.
Exactly. It's meant to prop creators up and help them identify the weaknesses in their own work. And that only benefits the work itself at any point. And a good illustration, I think, of this comes from my acting training, my theater training. I remember that we were not allowed to give, so we would be in classes doing monologues and stuff like that. And we were not allowed to give any destructive criticism. And we weren't even allowed to say what we would have done better. Well, we were the constructive criticism in that case, in that context, because it's different depending on the context. But in that context, the best constructive criticism was to say, it seemed like you were trying to convey this, and I did not get that. Or I did get that. That was real. That made me feel this. It was more about saying, like, how did it make you feel? I mean, again, that's not necessarily going to be constructive criticism in the video game sense, but it's a good starting point. It's to say, like, it seemed like your objective was to do this. Did you succeed or at that objective or not? Because that is constructive criticism, constructive feedback. So,
all right. A question for you then, continuing to talk, because you just talked a lot. What is the difference between this idea of video game criticism and a video game review?
Well, they're the same thing. Ideally, they're the same thing. I mean, a review should include some amount of criticism, I think. I suppose a review could just be like an informative piece, which would be like to say, like, this game has this game has this game has this game does this. But when was the last time you read a review like that didn't also include some level of evaluation? I'll use the word evaluation as opposed to judgment, because again, judgment also has negative connotations. But like, most reviews say like, yeah, the graphics were okay, but I noticed that they dip down to under 60 frames per second at certain points and blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to include that, like, and yes, that's both informative, that's also informative, but it's also usually is attached to some kind of judgment evaluation in that regard as well. Where the difference, I think the biggest difference to draw, though, is between video game criticism and video game journalism, because I would argue that in most cases, video game criticism is a form of journalism, but not all journalism. Like, what Jason Schreier does isn't video game criticism. What he does is exposés.
Right. Yep.
And then there are also people who are just talking about the news, and that's also journalism, and saying what, news about the industry, though it may include a certain level of criticism, it is not necessarily inherently video game criticism. Video game criticism is a specific subset of journalism that is meant to give consumers an idea as to what the product they're buying is about, is like. And to an even more meta level, it's about evaluating each video game for its artistic merits, I think.
Yep. Right. So video games are art. We talked about that on our very first episode way back in 2017 when we launched this podcast, and being able to approach video games with a certain academic eye as far as criticism is what our goal is for everyone to do. We want to challenge all players to do that. We want to look at, do video game journalists do that? What are the biases they're in? We look at reviews. We look at how we approach video games as approaching art, because in our mind, they're the same. Video games are a form of art. Therefore, you approach games the same way you would approach art. Therefore, it's the same as like food, movies, books, etc. And that's, to me, the important part of playing, like, of any artistic ecosystem, like, is getting this idea out. Like, it's more than just valid. It sounds cheap to say, like, oh, I want to validate my wasting of time playing video games. It's just like what kids would do. It's like, no, these are actual works of art that have merits. And on this podcast, we enjoy talking about them. But so this entire industry of influencers and video game journalists and all of those folks, they're all doing this. When they write their reviews, when they talk about them on podcasts, when they show them on YouTube, and they live stream them on Twitch and critique them live. And it's valid, it's great, it's awesome, and I want everyone to do it. So what's different about critiquing a video game versus a book, movie, food, or art?
Yeah, I mean, video games... Well, let me talk about art in general real quick, and I'll just say that, like, criticism is important. I'll piggyback on what you're saying, is criticism is important, a part of the medium, any artistic medium, because, again, critics, though they don't make anything themselves, they're like the first line of helping people make their work better, as I kind of mentioned in the first question. And that feedback is really important for artists to receive, because, again, it's not that, it's that unbiased feedback, because, a creator usually gets so wrapped up in their own work that they don't even sometimes know if it's good or bad. And so having like an actual like organization basically to get in there and be like, yeah, that was really good, that was incredible, and and then not just to say that, but to be able to go further and say, and here is why, here are the exact reasons why. It's super important for any artist. And so specifically when it comes to video games, I think that evaluation, because again, it's a team, it's usually a team effort. It's usually not the single unified vision of one auteur. And even if it is, he has to have a team that is working with him. And the video game industry has gone to show that like sales alone don't necessarily indicate whether a game is even good or not. Mm-hmm. Because as we talked about in our art episode, like, games can be so many different things. Like, some games are really just trying to be the best, PvP game, and therefore it is more of like a competition, an esport, which is different from like something like Uncharted, which is trying to tell a narrative, a story. It's trying to give you these artistic tableaus and sensibilities that help you feel, that are meant to make you evoke something and feel something. And so totally different things. So like, when a game is like trying to do that, like, you need to have, like, when a game is trying to do that, you need to have something to say, like, whether they succeeded or not, and be able to articulate why, because it's very different when it's just like, oh, dude, Uncharted's so good, it's so freaking good, man. Yeah, what was good about it? It was just so good. Like, being able to actually like break it down and say the graphics were incredible, the performances were incredible, the voice acting, and more than that, they made me feel this, and they made me do this, and like, that's good. And on the other side of it too, being able to say, like, the game really didn't land these things well, or the game, even the story was interesting, but it kept getting interrupted by this. this, or, it had this distracting side quest, which made me do this and totally pulled me out of the experience. Like, being able to break it down by those things. And then you've got the mixed bags, the games where it's like, this was good about it and this was bad about it. And being able to like really narrow in on like, I loved this game. However, it really did have some issues with XYZ. I think it's important to be able to compartmentalize that. And people need to, not only do individuals need to learn how to do that, but like, it's good that there are people that also do that to help people figure that out and give voice to that, because it does really only make games better. I think that's the unseen advantage to critics being out there and criticism being out there, is being able to help developers from a completely unbiased, hopefully completely unbiased and hopefully third party perspective, to be able to someone who's not necessarily interested in selling the video game, someone who's interested in selling their ideas and their voice. So yes, there is an interest in making money, of course, from the side of the critic as well, but it helps. It's kind of a check and balance, right? It's not just like Sony being like, oh man, you should buy God of War. It's so good. It's such an artistic and incredible vision. Having third party people be like, yeah, God of War's incredible artistic vision. And here's why. And here's what they need to do in the next one to continue to make it better. I think that only helps the industry at large in the long run. So
the other side of that coin is capitalism. And even games that aren't necessarily reviewed or critiqued well, or even shown well in the spotlight of the critiques or critics, still get mass produced and pumped out annually because they sell very well. And if you are a publisher and you're looking to look at risk versus reward as far as pumping money to a development studio, you're going to look at sales history and you're going to see what actually sold. And we see a lot in the gaming industry of games that are getting raked across the coals as far as criticisms, but they make money hand over fist. They're not artistic at all, but they make money hand over fist. They're annualized, and they make players feel like they're just a cog in a wheel of churning out money and microtransactions. It's a lot of sports games these days. A lot of shooter-type games. The free-to-play model all happened. And these games don't get reviewed or talked about on podcasts very much. I mean, the entire mobile gaming market, when do you ever hear about half the games that are coming out there? They get reviewed poorly and critiqued in the bad sense of the way, all over the place, but they still get pumped out because they make money. And so like, there's the other side of that is, you can take your review or you can take your critique and shove it because this thing makes a ton of money. And so we're going to keep doing that because it's safe.
Right. In which case,
please the shareholders.
I think then criticism or the critical journalism there, I think, is in many ways the like last line of defense for the players who actually are interested in buying, a game that is going to evoke a sense of quality for them. There are people out there, of course, who are happy to just be a part of that cog in the machine. And they too deserve to know that that's what the game is. You know what I mean? Like having a complete third party that will just tell you what they think is good and bad about the game is literally why people buy games in the first place, is because someone sat there and told them what they thought was good and bad about it. And if that lined up with what they were looking for, great. Criticism is just a way for that to be done on sort of a bigger scale, a way for people, again, the more successful the critic is, or the more successful the critic's platform is, I should say, the wider that will reach, and therefore the more effective it is. Because, again, someone like you or I, seeing a trailer for a game that the publisher themselves produced meant to trick you into buying it. Let's not mince words. That's exactly what trailers and marketing campaigns are all about, is tricking you into buying the game. Whether it's good or not, whether it's worth the trick or not, it doesn't change the fact that they're all a manipulation. Seeing that and then being able to contrast that and be like, okay, well, what do these critics that maybe I trust them, maybe I don't, maybe I just want to hear something about it because someone's saying something about it. And that really is kind of the role, I think, in a lot of ways, of criticism. And again, it doesn't have to necessarily be someone who's paid to do it. Everyone is a critic, and everyone can offer their critical opinion. Some are just trained and to do it, or have honed their critical talents in conjunction with other talents like the ability to write, and therefore have reached a wider audience. But everybody does this. Everybody should do this. And I think that's part of the reason why it's important. We have
two great examples happening in the gaming industry right now. One just happened and one is ongoing, but one of them is Godfall. And you and I know how to approach trailers, know how to approach release and PR speak, because we've been doing this for a while. So our criticism has been shaped and evolved over the last many years. We've had this podcast, and even before that through our own gaming experiences. And so we kind of were apprehensive to Godfall.
Right. Neither of us pre-ordered it, and we were both kind of hesitant to do so.
Yep. And that's due to who the developer was and who the publisher was and the footage we saw and the things that were being revealed and the pace at which it's being revealed.
I mean,
and all
we
these
liked
things.
a lot of the things we saw. I mean, I was almost entirely sold on the game by their marketing campaign alone. It wasn't until the critical reviews came out a couple days before it released that I was able to be like, pull the plug on it.
And the only difference between what we saw prior leading up to the game and the actual release of the game is the game getting played by someone. And that is what
and
was
those
the
people
final
putting
review.
their thoughts to words and getting those words
in a way
out
we
to us.
Yeah.
Yep. In a way that we could
And
identify
we
with.
did not pre-order it. We did not buy it. We moved on to successful. Like to our success, we were able to put that money towards other games that we want to play. The other side of that coin is Cyberpunk. CD Projekt Red, a beloved studio. This game's surely going to change this is going to change gaming. I remember saying that. This is going to be the future of gaming. It's going to be the next big open world RPG. It's going to set the new standard. Everyone's going to chase after this, and they're going to leave the likes of Grand Theft Auto 5 and Horizon Zero Dawn and Breath of the Wild in the rearview mirror. They're going to look at Cyberpunk as the new standard. And it came out as a flop. It was a buggy mess. The writing was great and the characters were good, but everything else about the game flopped and failed. I still bought it. I still pre-ordered it. You just platinumed it, and I'm working on the platinum now, so we're still playing that game. But you look at how criticism affects its sales. That's one of the examples of a game that came out poor, but it sold everything and made a profit. So the company that did it didn't really get punished for it, but the gaming industry knows now a lesson from that, and that is to not trust these big developers. And so criticism is to blame. Like that, like we're talking about video game criticism. It's that reason that from now on, what CD Projekt Red comes out with, The Witcher 4 or any DLC, like we're going to look at them with a different lens, but I think it also affects the greater industry as a whole that taught people and critics how to approach these types of big games and not just take them all like wholesale.
Yeah, and Cyberpunk's an interesting case, and we'll go ahead and use Cyberpunk as a segue to talk about our next question, which is what are some of the pitfalls of criticism and how it affects the game industry. I don't actually have this in the notes, but Cyberpunk's a great example of this because one of the ways in which criticism failed Cyberpunk is it was manipulated by their marketing campaign. And I think we talked about this a little bit, but when the game came out, but the game was the copies that were given to the critics, the review copies, the reviewers ahead of time, they were only given PC copies. So they weren't given the copy of the game on the platforms that would have showed its true faults. They were given PC copies to run on good hardware. Even if the game didn't run well on the PC, the reviewer would have been likely to say, well, my PC is probably just not up to snuff for it, because that's what the nature of PC gaming. But the implication of the game being sold for the PlayStation, the big thing that the criticism that Cyberpunk got from its consumers and eventually from the reviewers was the fact that it ran like crap on the base consoles, the PS4 and the Xbox One. It ran fine on the PS5, it ran fine on the Xbox Series X, it ran fine on good PCs, but it did not run on the base consoles like almost at all. The bugs were more intense, and all the quality of the game, we're talking about resolution dipping down to 720 at points,
frame rate down to
15 frames per second. Awful
texture pop in, loading
terrible
times.
Experience. For people on the base consoles. But the criticism, the critical analysis, all the reviews that came out before the game launched indicated that like there were bugs, but it's not that bad. It still looks good. It still runs good. It still feels good. It's still fun to play. That was every review I read was about that. And though there were caveats of people saying we only got a PC, that should have been the red flag. And the red flag was there, and people were kind of hesitant about it. But the game was getting scores of 9s and 8, like high 8s and 9s, and stuff like that. When the game, if they had played it on the base consoles on the PS4, they may have been, lower. Their critical analysis may have been more harsh as a result of that, and fairly harsher. So that was a way in which sometimes, we don't see it often, and we're probably going to see it a lot less in the future. Cyberpunk was probably a big warning sign for reviewers from now on, but that was hopefully the lesson that was learned. But that was a case of where a marketing campaign manipulated critical analysis in order to...
Even the very first time the game was showed off, no one had any controllers. It was a video curated to show you exactly what they wanted.
To see,
when the reviews did happen, those PC copies and the reviews published, the embargo was lifted, they were not allowed to use any review footage of their own. They had to use only what CD Projekt Red provided as B-roll footage for those reviews. So that was another red flag. I mean, red flags were everywhere for this. Like they were trying to cover it all up and definitely manipulate things.
Sure. Though the critics are to blame, the critics should have been more careful. The reviewers should have used that critical analysis, that critical thinking, to see those red flags and report on them. And there's an argument to be made. They should have warned the consumers a little bit more aggressively on that point. I can't blame them entirely. They were also misled. They aren't the only ones at fault, but it is it's a pitfall. And talking about pitfalls, I think some of the other pitfalls, one of the other ones that comes to mind is and this is a danger. I think this is mostly a danger for critics themselves and for amateur critics. And this actually happened to me for a long time with movies after being kind of trained through my theater education to be more critical of things I watch. There's that sort of, quote, cynical mentality. Whenever I think about this, I think of that episode of South Park where Stan becomes a cynic, and everything literally looks and sounds like crap. Literally, as in like he's watching trailers for a movie and all the characters like literal feces are coming out of their mouth, and all the sounds that he hears and music he listens to are fart sounds. And that's it's the everything is crap mentality. It is. I am approaching things so critically that all I'm looking for is the faults. And I'm not allowing myself to experience the fun things, the good things about this. And so everything is crap is kind of a danger, especially for amateur critics, is to not be able to find the joy in something. And I think that also leads to this other problem, which is this growing divide we're seeing between critics and consumers. Because critics, I think of like the idea of Oscar bait. I think, and again, I'm using a lot of movie examples, but this stuff happens in the gaming industry too, where it's like critics are looking for one thing and they're missing they're losing touch, so to speak, with what consumers actually want. Like I think of like Marvel movies reviewing terribly, or like even what's another good example? There's so many times where you see like the scores are flipped on like Rotten Tomatoes, where like the critics either like The Last Jedi is a great example of like the critics loved it and praised it for all of its artistic merits and everything that Rian Johnson was doing as an artist with that movie, but the Star Wars fans were like, no, you ruined Star Wars. Because critics kind of, in that regard, critics did kind of lose touch with, they were so focused on the artistic aspects of it that they lost touch with what Star Wars fans were actually wanting out of the experience. And I do think
there's a single video game that is glaring. It's big and it's the elephant in the room and it's obvious to this conversation right now. And that is The Last of Us Part 2.
Oh yeah, that's a great one. Yep.
And in that, the example that you just gave with the movies and all those things, look at Metacritic. When games come out, look at the consumer Metacritic scores that people will just jump all over and review bomb and make it 0 and make it horrible. And then the critics come in and they say, oh, these things about it. And there's a big divide between the actual critics and the consumers themselves. Now, what's unique about The Last of Us Part 2 is the reasons why the consumers were rating it 0. They were overly cynical, saying everything is crap because of like a political ideology that they didn't agree with being presented. Or because they were miffed that it wasn't as good as the first one, or a certain character, something happened to this person that they didn't like. So the whole game is trash. Nothing is good. When it deserved every single award that it received at the Game Awards. There's over 7 of them for the reasons that they earned it. But there are consumers who say that this is critic bait. It won Game of the Awards. Of course it did. Game awards for everything. Of course, because this is what the gaming industry, and like they criticize the gaming industry and what they criticize the critics. So there's this massive like war going on between the critics and the consumers, and the consumers accuse the critics of overlooking major plot flaws and major obvious political bias and calling it good, which then the critics respond with, oh, this is an actual work of art. You don't know what you're talking about. And it goes back. I mean, it was a mess to watch that unfold.
And that's, and it happens in the other direction too. Whoops. Where like critics, I just threw my glasses apparently across the screen, so a little inside baseball, as you've been saying. It happens in the other direction too, though, and it kind of harkens back to that idea of like sometimes critics can be so like focused on whether something is quote unquote artistic to their sensibilities or not, that they kind of miss the fact that the game can be just plain fun and people are enjoying it because it's fun. And you see, I mean, I think there's almost more examples of times where the critics are like bashing a game and the consumers are like, this game's awesome, I'm having so much fun with this game, and that happens too. And so in that regard, then the consumers rightly criticize the critics and saying, or can rightly criticize the critics and saying like, you're missing the very basic fact that this game is fun and it's addicting and it's enjoyable and I'm having a blast with it.
Right.
And again, the better that the consumers get at actually voicing that and making those arguments from an educated point of view, then again, the more that those arguments, I think, properly hold weight. There is, I would say that this next pitfall, I think, is a failure of the consumers. in regards to how to engage with criticism. And there is this mentality of like, the only good criticism is the criticism that I agree with. You'll see this happen all the time. People who want to trash EA are stoked on linking articles that are like, Anthem is trash. Anthem, no matter how well written the article is, sometimes they're actually really good criticism and constructive criticism of what Anthem did wrong. But people will only link it because they're like, yeah, screw EA. EA sucks. Anthem's awful. But then when it comes to a game they love, or a developer they love, or something that they disagree with, then suddenly the critic is trash and garbage. And I think that's a fallacy. I think it's very important for people to engage with again, take each individual piece for what it is, because there's bad criticism out there, but there's also, a point in listening to someone and saying, oh yeah, no, they have a point. This wasn't great. And even though I'm willing to overlook those faults, doesn't mean that everybody is, or that everybody should. And so I think it's very important to like evaluate criticism, like evaluate, even critical reviews or critical works, not movies, like YouTube videos and stuff like that. Like, evaluate those critical pieces for what they are. And if you don't agree with them, it's totally okay to compartmentalize and say, yeah, that was a good argument. I don't agree with that, but I can understand where you're coming from. I think
we are seeing this played out right now, nasty toxicity all over the internet with the console wars, quote unquote, that don't really exist. The console wars are not a thing. PlayStation and Sony are doing something entirely different to what Microsoft and Xbox are doing. And if you actually approach both platforms with the correct criticism, you'll notice that and you will appreciate both of them. But there were people vaping into their Xboxes and showing it smoke to indicate that they are failing. There were people that were doing the same sort of like destruction on PlayStation 5, saying they're going to overheat when they're putting them in boxes. And they just go back and forth and they hate each other because their platform isn't winning. Digital Foundry does these amazing, very objective, probably the most objective video game reviews and rundowns of all the performance, frame rates, all the details you can imagine, texture, refresh rates, etc., everything. And they'll talk about whether the PlayStation did better than the Xbox or the Xbox did better. And they'll immediately look in the comments, whatever wins or loses, they're that fanboy. If Sony's better, oh, you're a Sony fanboy, you guys just Sony ponies. Xbox wins, oh, you guys are just in camp Xbox, you just want to hate Sony because they're on top. And like, you just see this war play out everywhere in Reddit and comments on YouTube and Twitter. It's ridiculous, and it absolutely is mind-boggling that people would like attach themselves and their identity to a brand and try to push that across as criticism when it's just obviously a bias for some reason.
That's so ridiculous. Understand. Yeah, and iPhones suck, and Apple's is the worst, and never buy Apple. No.
And another great example of this, a good example of what you're talking about that I want to get at, is our different approach to our excitement for Pokemon Snap 2. Or the sequel, I guess whatever the Switch version of Pokemon Snap. I immediately was met with, this is amazing. This is exactly what Pokemon Snap is. It's awesome. And then you came back with, well, if you look at modern video game design, a rail shooter, it's kind of archaic and it limits the player's ability to do things. Why don't we just have like an open world kind of photography, do all the things?
When was the last time you saw an open world photography game? Like, how incredible would an open world photography game be? Personally, never seen it, would love to see it, and I think Pokemon should be spearheading that.
Right. And I think both criticisms are valid. Like, what is the heart of what makes Pokemon Snap? And that is the rail shooting aspect of like throwing food and interacting with the environment from a very limited aspect and trying to take pictures. And the challenge is you can't move. And so you can't get the best picture unless you're really good at the game. But you're also correct. And the gaming industry is moving, and we have the technology and the hardware to do this. Why don't we make this amazing open world experience where you can still challenge the player to do those things in a different way and advance the medium forward in a new way that's innovative?
Yeah. And you're right. Like, both opinions are valid and educated and based on like, and those are the questions. And I think that's what like we're getting at, is this idea that like criticism should be used it should be used for these exact purposes, which is to evaluate things and assess things for the good things and the bad things. And so to just simply say that criticism is bad or critics are bad or critics are wrong because I don't agree with them, is as much of a fallacy of just simply saying that this game is great because it's great, because I love it. You know what I mean? Because and overlooking its flaws. I think that those are, it's very important to break out of those mentality. I will say a final pitfall of criticism is when criticism is used to attack people. I do think this is something that you don't necessarily see from the professional critics as much as you will from amateur critics. But when you simply sit there and say, like, if you were to single out a single individual, a single creator, and just say he or she is garbage, we'll say Hideo Kojima, for example, and just say, oh, Hideo Kojima is attached to a game. These are the reasons why I hate Hideo Kojima. You know what I mean? Like, that's not criticism.
Right.
That is just attacking people and being toxic.
Yep.
And so that goes along, that goes doubly as much for people who are attacking critics as well. But I think that, criticism, the idea of criticism or critical analysis can often bring that out in people, and it's definitely one of the problems with criticism in the industry. So last question is, I've hit upon this idea multiple times throughout the episode already, but I want to focus in on it, and that is the idea that everyone is a critic. That's one of those pithy sayings we have in our culture, is everyone's a critic. It's often used as a way of saying, like, if you give your friend, if you make your friend a drink and you're like, here, try this, and they go, well, I don't really like this, and okay, well, everyone's a critic. It's a way to oftentimes write off the feedback that others give you. But it's a kind of a true statement. Everyone has an opinion on something. I like to say opinions are like buttholes. Everyone's got one. They all stink.
I would use belly buttons as a more family friendly.
That's fine. So everyone's a critic, and I do believe that's kind of true, because everyone's capable of not only having an opinion, but articulating that opinion in an educated way. So how then can we learn from criticism? How then can we learn from other critics, other people who do this for a living? How can we learn from it and then use that, what we've learned from that, to sort of flex our own critical minds in ways that can influence the industry and make things better? If the intention of criticism is to make things better, how do we do that? And how does criticism help us get there, I think, is the question, the heart of the question I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, the cool part about what can we learn about, I'm just going to use my own experience and what I've learned from actual criticism. I've been reading gaming magazines since I was a child. So I have like a collection behind me on my shelf of Game Pros and Electronic Gaming Monthly and Nintendo Power through the 90s and the early aughts and 2000s. And I've learned the language of how to look at something. It's like you might not know what texture filtering is as a new amateur critique or critic, but I understand what that is because I watched Digital Foundry's in-depth analysis of technical performance on video games. So I know what level of detail means and draw distance and all of these things you can kind of use and leverage. Like, oh, that's a term that captures this. And it allows you to analyze games on both a technical and a journalistic perspective. But then emotionally, like what are emotion words? Like I always remember that Christmas movie, Four Christmases. He doesn't know how to use his emotion words. He takes to streaking and he just gets naked and runs out because he doesn't know the language to like communicate the emotion words. And that's, what can you learn from criticism? Read other people's critiques and experience what other people are saying and learn that language of how to like build a discussion around a video game. And I remember being so frustrated years and years and years ago with a friend of mine who had no criticism language at all. None. And everything sucked. The Nintendo Wii was absolute garbage because it's just a system that has a bunch of shovelware. And I was like, but some of the best games ever made exist on the Wii. You can't just discredit the entire Wii. Oh yeah, it sucks because all the games suck and all the graphics are terrible. It's not HD. And we have a term for people who just look at one aspect of games for graphics, and I'm not going to go there because that's like red light district area. So we're not going to do that. But like, I remember just being so frustrated not having any friends around me who could actually articulate games in a way that I wanted to, because I had that wealth of knowledge from So like anyone who wants to get into that or even cares to do that, or I'm not trying to have like some elitist class hierarchy of like who can talk and who can't, because then you try to do these one-up games and that's just silly. I don't want to do any of that. But what can we all learn from criticism is just how to look at a video game and talk about it. Like, yeah, the more you're in the world, the more you're there.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is like learning I'm going to use this word compartmentalization, learning how to say my emotions are one thing, my thoughts are another, you know what I mean? And being able to put things in a box. And so whether it's consuming criticism, whether I'm reading something, a critical argument, a critical review, and saying, okay, I see where they're coming from. I will entertain that idea, but I don't agree with it. So like instead of having a gut emotional reaction and being like, you are trash, you are garbage for having that thought and saying that thing, being able to say like, okay, no, that was well thought out. That was clearly well thought out and well written, and well articulated. I disagree with that though. That's okay. I'm allowed to disagree with that. And being able to just put that in, put those things in boxes essentially. But even furthermore, then as a critic, being able to also say like, it's also valid to be like, okay, here's what this game did well. And here's what this game did not so well. And again, that can be a game you adore and love. And, 10 out of 10, Breath of the Wild, for me is a 10 out of 10 game, but I can sit there and also as a amateur critic, I can say, okay, the game is great, but man, the sword breaking, like the weapon breaking system and the fact that I'll get this weapon and have, climbed a mountain for this weapon and fought my way through hordes of monsters and found this incredible, awesome sword only to have it break like 20 seconds later after like killing 3 enemies with it. Kind of not necessarily, in my opinion, the best design choice. And I would love to see them in the next one have fewer weapons that don't break as often. You know what I mean? Like that is a valid critical analysis. And it's not saying I hate this game. You know what I mean? It's saying I dislike this aspect of this game and I think the design could be better. And I think that's good. It's also good to say, in a game like Anthem and be like, you know what, this game was just a hot mess. It was full of bugs. It was poorly thought out in like how load screens worked, and overall was just a frustrating and aggravating experience. And yet the combat and the idea of flying around in mechs, the very core idea of the game, was freaking sweet, and they nailed flight. Like, so being able to also highlight the good things of bad games. I think those are really important skills to hone. And like I said, the biggest thing that we can all learn how to do better and how to be better critics, again, whether we're getting paid for it or not, the best thing that a critical mind can do is being able to take something apart, deconstruct it piece by piece, evaluating each piece for its merits or its downsides, and then being able to put those things to words in a way that, again, I think I've been using the term educated, and I agree. I don't mean to give off this idea of elitism, like you have to be smart in order to be a critic. No, you just have to be able to convey what you mean, and you don't have to do it in flowery language. But if you can if you can find a way to convey the exact feeling and exact intention of your words when describing something, then again, an education helps with that, but it's not a prerequisite. So it's just, I think that we can all learn how to do that better. And if we can all do that, then we really can influence the industry, because we can take every video game part piece by piece and help the creators have a good way forward. And whether they choose to listen to that criticism or not is a whole different can of worms. But I do think I think it's a good skill for us all to learn. And again, I guess the other thing to do, the other step, how people can be better critics, is like, just know how to use your voice. For us, we wanted to talk about video games. We want to talk about video games. And though our podcast isn't entirely a critical podcast, it's not we're not doing a ton of video game reviews, you'll still hear plenty of criticism coming, critical analysis coming from every episode, no matter what we're talking about. When we talk about the games, we will be trying to talk about them from a critical standpoint. And so, for us, it was just, let's start a podcast and let's talk about these things. So just finding ways to use your voice. And again, we're not a crazy popular podcast. We're not blown up or anything like that, but we have an audience and we have people who are listening to us. The important thing that I'm trying to convey is everybody has an audience. You all have audiences. They're not huge audiences necessarily. They may be. And if so, awesome. If not, just know that your voice has an influence over someone. It may be your family member, it may be your brother or sister, it may be your friends, it may be even a parent, it may just be a colleague at work, but someone values your opinion. So knowing how to not just say, oh, the game's good, why the game is good, or the game is trash. Why is the game trash? Break those things up, because one man's trash is another man's treasure. Someone may be listening to your description of why you hate the game and be like, yeah, you know what? I'm willing to give it a try despite that. And actually what you said about this aspect of the game really intrigues me. Termite might have played a Dark Souls game and been like, I hated it. I died so many times. It was super challenging. And someone else might hear that and be like, a challenge sounds great right about now, because every game I've played has been so easy. So like, again, that's so it's important to be able to have that language. So I think that's what we can all kind of learn. We
leverage social media as well, and everyone else can do that. That kind of like echoes, not just family and friends locally around you, but you have friends online, you talk to people online, you interact with folks anywhere. When you critique a video game in a way that conveys what your thoughts are, as you were talking about, you could even bring a non-gamer into the fold, like someone who has no interest in what Smash Bros. Is doing, and you're talking about, oh, this new character was added, and you're really excited about it, and you can articulate why Sephiroth is cool, then maybe somebody's like, oh, well, maybe I should give this Smash Bros. You have these Smash parties all the time. You're always talking about Smash Bros. What is this game? I want to come check it out. And then somebody who's never played it falls in love with it, and now you've extended your love for video games and you've passed that on to someone else.
Yeah,
and even
just
sharing influence in the industry as well.
Yeah, or even just sharing that conversation, like having, like, being able, I cannot tell you the amount of times that I've like started talking to someone who's not into video games, but something they say has been like, oh, I really love this kind of thing, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I know you don't play games, but there's this incredible game that does this. I've had conversations with my mom about video games, and she's never going to play them. And the intent isn't to get her to play them. The intent, though, is to share, like, I had this experience and it was really incredible. And, this story that this game told was really powerful and meaningful to me. And just being able to share even that with someone and being able to explain why it was impactful and why it was meaningful, you'll find that it'll deepen your connections with other people as well. And so it all comes down to being able to just say, being confident in your opinions is part of that, and being able to say, like, I think that I want to share this with you, and I think that you'll get something out of it. Yeah, even if it's not a new favorite game, it may just be a connection between the two of us. You understand me better, and that can only be helpful. So I think that's a good place to end. I think that's a nice little soapbox to end on. So do you have any closing thoughts, or
no? Just be nice to folks, love one another, and communicate. How you feel in a way that's constructive.
Awesome. All right. Well, then that is the show. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what your thoughts on the idea of video game criticism, critical analysis, critical thinking, whatever you want to term it. We want to hear about what you think about its role in the video game industry and its role in your video game experiences. So have you ever been influenced positively or negatively by a video game review, a critical analysis of a video game? And we want to hear those stories. We want to hear those thoughts. We want to hear that feedback. So Termite, where can the good listeners of the 80-Bit Pod Smash share those thoughts with us if they have them?
Our one-stop shop at 80bitpodsmash.com, 80bit podsmash.com is our landing website with links to all of our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, Twitter, as well as our podcast platforms, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Apple Podcasts. We're everywhere. We have an RSS feed link. You can throw that RSS feed or RSS link into any of your podcast platforms of your choice and be up to date. We have a Discord server, and there's a link to that Discord server in all of our show notes. You can find us all over the internet. If you can't do any of that, you can send us an email, 80bitpodsmash@gmail.com, and we'll point you wherever you want to be. We'll get you there. Please leave comments. Subscribe on these platforms, because that's how you get up-to-date information on what we're doing. I remember when I was getting these new consoles and I was trying to update the audience on the fly. I know some people probably fell through the cracks and were like not aware of when things were happening, but because we do things on Twitch now, it's live, it's actually happening. Mondays and Wednesday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern time. We have a new show on Monday, the 80-Bit Newscast. We run you guys through the weekly video game news, and then on Wednesday night, we have our gameplay live streams where Penguin and Termite alternate, or sometimes together. We'll stream a game that you care about over Twitch, and then those videos get uploaded to YouTube. So as things happen and unfold, you guys need to be made aware of it. So subscribe to us, give us feedback, give us thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, and ideas in any way that you want, and we will respond.
Excellent. The next episode that we will be doing comes courtesy of my wife. She gave me this idea, and she wanted me to talk about celebrity cameos. So we're going to talk about what celebrities have shown up in what video games, and we'll talk a little bit about what we think some of the best ones were and what we think some of the not so good ones were. Good, bad, ugly. So that you have to look forward to on January 25th, the Monday. That will be our 175th
teaser.
Episode. Yeah.
175th episode. Is that what you said? Sorry.
Yes, 175.
I didn't mean to. Do you know who the actor who plays Jon Snow is?
Kit Harington.
I was going to say that, but I wasn't confident that that's who it was. He starred in a video game. Do you know which one it was?
Nope, I don't.
Yes! We're going to talk about it next week. That's
Yay! Exciting. All right, well, we'll see you then.
See you next week.